They say the emperor forged his sons in fire and storm. But if that is true, then one son was tempered in something harsher still. Not in laboratories, nor beneath the vaults of Terra, but in the endless winter of Fenris, a world that has broken empires, drowned armies, and devoured the strong with teeth of ice and flame. This is where the saga of Leman Russ begins, the blade of the emperor, and before you lies not a simple tale of war, but a myth written in frost, in blood, and in the howls of wolves that have never known chains. Stay, for in this story you will see not only how a Primarch was shaped, but how a world itself was carved into the marrow of his soul. Fenris is a contradiction, a planet alive with fire, yet locked in ice. Its continents rise like jagged blades from oceans that boil in summer and freeze to unbroken tundra in winter. Whole land masses sink beneath the waves each cycle, drowning tribes, cities, and histories, only to rise again in another season, fresh and raw, as though the planet itself resents permanence. Its seas are thick with leviathans, scaled horrors that swallow longboats whole. Its skies are haunted by fire drakes, winged predators that dive with shrieks that echo like doom across the ice. And upon the land roam the Fenrisian wolves, great beasts the size of horses, their fangs glistening white as the glaciers, their eyes burning with a primal cunning. To be hunted by one is death. To be raised by them, as Russ would be, is to be marked by the wild forever. But the wolves are not the only predators. The people of Fenris are hunters themselves, nomadic tribes locked in endless sagas of war and survival. They live by the axe and by the spear, their laws written in the sagas sung by their skalds, their justice measured in combat beneath aurora-streaked skies. Honor is not philosophy here, it is survival. To falter in strength is to starve. To show weakness is to die. Each year, the long night devours months of light. The winds howl like spirits of the dead, and the seas shatter ships to splinters. And when the brief summer comes, it is not mercy, but a time of greater peril. Rivers flood and volcanoes awaken, disgorging fire across the frozen plains. Fenris does not forgive, it tests. Every tribe that survives becomes harder, crueler, forged like steel struck on an anvil of disaster. Imagine the life of a child born here, suckled on sagas of heroes, watching kin devoured by beasts, learning to hold a blade before learning to speak. Imagine such a child surviving not just by cunning, but by will so fierce it bends the world around him. From this crucible of horror and beauty, Leman Russ would emerge, not just as a Primarch, but as Fenris itself given flesh. The sagas tell us that Fenris is more than a world. It is a proving ground chosen by fate. Every glacier, every volcano, every wolf's howl was part of the Emperor's unspoken plan, that here, in a realm where survival itself is legend, one son would learn what it meant to endure. One son would know the price of weakness and the cost of strength. And when the galaxy burned, he would carry Fenris's lesson to brother and foe alike, that only the savage endure. But even in those early years before Russ fell from the skies, Fenris had already begun whispering his saga. Its people told stories of a destined leader, a wolf-born king who would rise when the night was darkest. They called him the wolf that stalks between stars. They believed one day he would come to unite them, or to judge them. And when a babe wrapped in fire fell screaming into the snow, the prophecy found its teeth. Russ was not yet a man, nor even a name, but already Fenris had claimed him. And in that claiming, it had forged the blade the Emperor would one day wield. Not a sword of tempered steel, but a wolf of ice and fire, hunger and loyalty, strength and savagery. The blade of Fenris, the blade of the Emperor. They say the stars themselves carried him, cast adrift like a shard of fire hurled from the hand of a god. His cradle was not silk nor steel, but a burning capsule that screamed across the skies of Fenris before shattering into the ice. And from that smoke and ruin, a child crawled forth, alone, half-naked, steaming breath against a world that kills the unprepared moments. That child was Leman Russ. On any other world, he would have perished within hours. But Fenris does not deal in mercy, it deals in fate. The wolves found him first. Great beasts with eyes like frozen suns and teeth that could break stone. They did not kill him. They circled him, sniffed the smoke and blood, and in some deep instinct saw not prey, but kin. And so, the boy was taken into their pack. He suckled from their mothers, fought their cubs, and learned to run across the snow on hands and feet, claws of ice digging into his skin. Russ grew wild. His muscles hardened not with the idle play of children, but with the constant struggle to keep pace with predators. He learned the language of growls, the rhythm of the hunt. His ears sharpened to the creak of frost, the whisper of prey breaking beneath snow. He did not speak with words, but with howls that shook the mountains and sent tribes fleeing in terror. He was not a child. He was a wolf, carved into the shape of a man. Yet fate is crueler than instinct. One night, when the auroras bled green fire across the sky, hunters came, a tribe of Fenrisians, gaunt and fierce, driven by hunger, followed the spoor of wolves. They found them, set spears, and the battle was slaughter. Russ fought beside his pack, teeth snapping, nails tearing flesh, a boy drenched in blood and rage. But for all his fury, he was dragged down. The wolves fell one by one, and when the sun rose, the child remained, bound in nets, snarling like an animal. The tribe did not kill him. They saw something in his eyes, something more than beast, something that burned. They dragged him back across the snow and into their halls of fire and saga. They tried to tame him with food, with drink, with stories shouted over roaring hearths. And little by little, he changed. He learned words, not to replace his growls, but to sharpen them. He learned to drink mead, to laugh, to fight in the shield wall, to wield axe and spear with hands that had once clawed at ice. And as he grew, so too grew the legends. He was stronger than any man, faster than any hunter, his laugh shaking rafters, his fury breaking bones. He wrestled ice trolls with his bare hands, slew sea serpents in boiling fjords, and brought back their heads to hang above the mead hall as trophies. He became not just a man among them, but a king. The tribe sang his name long before he took it. Russ, the Wolf King. They said he was chosen by the gods, a weapon sent from the heavens. His eyes glowed gold like the fire of the auroras. His voice carried like thunder, and when he raised his drinking horn, men swore the sagas themselves leaned closer to listen. He was no longer child, no longer wolf, but something greater. In those nights of fire and frost, beneath the northern lights and the endless dark, the myth of Leman Russ was born. And though he laughed and fought and drank as one of them, there was always something more in him, something the wolves had seen in that burning capsule. A destiny that howled louder than the beasts of Fenris, a hunger that no feast could sate. For Fenris had given him strength, and the tribes had given him purpose. But soon another would come, one who would demand loyalty beyond tribe and kin. And when that day came, Russ would be forced to decide whether he was wolf, man, or something far more dangerous. They say the gods test their chosen not with gifts, but with temptation. And for Leman Russ, the test came not from beast nor storm, but from the one who called himself Father, the Emperor of mankind, golden, eternal, a being who claimed dominion over every star that burned in the night. But Fenris bows to no master. And when the Emperor set foot upon that world of fire and ice, he did not find a lost child waiting. He found a wolf king who had already conquered death 100 times over. The sagas say the Emperor came cloaked in the auroras, walking across the frost as though the storms themselves parted before his steps. His eyes blazed with suns that no mortal could look upon for long. To the tribes of Fenris, he was a god, or a trickster who wore the skin of one. They whispered in fear, wondering if this was the All-Father of old, come to claim his wolf son back. They expected Leman Russ to kneel, but he did not kneel. He laughed. Imagine the scene. A great mead hall carved into the side of a mountain, its timbers dark with smoke, its rafters heavy with the skulls of beasts that had fed the tribe through endless winters. The long fire roared down the hall's center, casting sparks like embers from some ancient forge. Warriors lined the benches, their axes close at hand, their voices rising in chants that shook the walls. And at the head of it all, upon a throne of wolf bones and furs, sat Russ, gold-eyed, broad-shouldered, his laughter booming like thunder. A wolf among men, crowned not by ceremony, but by the fear and love of those who followed him. The doors opened, the wind howled, and into the hall stepped the Emperor. He was taller than any man, clad not in furs or steel, but in the radiance of his own presence. He did not need heralds or titles. His very being was a proclamation. Silence fell. Warriors who had braved the jaws of ice serpents felt their throats close. The air itself seemed heavier. Russ did not rise. He raised a horn of mead, drank deep, and wiped the foam from his mouth. His golden eyes met the Emperor's, not with reverence, but with challenge. "You come into my hall, stranger," Russ said, voice low and sharp as an axe blade. "Do you expect me to kneel? Then earn it." The Emperor did not speak. His lips curved. Was it amusement or recognition? None could tell, but he stepped forward, and for the first time in all his wanderings across the stars, the Emperor did not command. He competed. The first trial was strength. They cleared the hall, benches and warriors pushed aside, until only Russ and the stranger stood in the firelight. They grappled like titans, bodies colliding with the crack of thunder. Russ fought with the fury of Fenris, his roars shaking the rafters, his grip like the jaws of the wolves that had raised him. The Emperor moved with calm inevitability, each strike measured, each hold unbreakable. They wrestled until blood slicked the stones, until the warriors watching wept with awe. At last, with a crash that split the floor, Russ was thrown to his knees. He spat blood, then laughed as though defeat itself was a victory. For the first time, he had met one stronger. The second trial was cunning. Out into the wilds they went, beneath a sky alive with auroras. The prey was an ice drake, vast and ancient, its scales like mirrors of broken glaciers. Russ boasted he would slay 3 before the stranger could bring down one. He stalked the beast through cavern and crevasse, every step a hunter's dance. His axe bit deep, his roars echoed through the dark, and soon the beast lay broken at his feet. But when he turned, he saw the Emperor waiting, a second drake already slain behind him, its blood steaming in the snow. The Emperor had moved with patience, with inevitability, while Russ chased fury. Again, the wolf laughed. He had lost, but he respected the lesson. The third trial was endurance. In the mead hall, the tables groaned with roast meat and horns of mead. Russ and the Emperor sat side by side, devouring, drinking, roaring with laughter as horn after horn was emptied. Warriors fell silent, overcome by the storm of their voices. One by one, men collapsed beneath the tables, their strength gone. Skalds dropped their harps, unable to sing above the thunder of that laughter. Still Russ drank, still he boasted. But in the end, it was too much. His vision swam, his head fell heavy upon the table, and he slid into darkness, laughing even as he fell. The Emperor remained seated, serene, a horn still in his hand. 3 trials, 3 defeats. When Russ awoke, he did not rage. He did not snarl. He rose from the floor, his chest heaving, and he bowed his head. "You are stronger. You are wiser. You are greater." His words were not servile. They were proud. He had found a rival who was also father, a master who had earned what no one else could claim, his loyalty. And yet, that loyalty came with a warning. "I will serve you, father," Russ said, "but I will serve as myself. I am the wolf of Fenris. I will not be broken. I will not be tamed." The Emperor accepted. He had not come to break his son, but to wield him. And in that moment, the wolf became a blade, tempered, tested, sharpened to a deadly edge. A weapon the Emperor would one day turn not upon his enemies alone, but upon his own kin. For the Emperor did not name Russ conqueror, nor guardian. He gave him a darker burden, executioner. The word hung in the air like a curse. Russ did not yet understand its weight, nor the blood it would demand of him. But in the roar of the feast hall, in the glow of the fire, in the echo of the Emperor's hand upon his shoulder, he laughed, and the sound was like a wolf's howl carried across the endless night. He had gained a father. He had sworn fealty. He had become the blade of the Emperor. But blades are forged to cut, and one day, this blade would taste the blood of brothers. They say a man's soul is shaped by the world that raised him. If that is true, then what of a legion, born not from one man, but from an echo of a world itself? When the Emperor placed Leman Russ at the head of the 6th Legion, the wolves of Fenris gained sons across the stars. And in their image, the Legion became more than warriors. It became the pack, the saga, the fong of the Emperor's will. From the beginning, the 6th Legion was different. Where other legions drilled in silence, their ranks gleaming like automata of war, the wolves sang. Their halls were alive with laughter, with challenge, with sagas recited in booming voices. They drank and roared before battle as if each campaign were a feast, and each victory a stanza in an endless saga. To the other legions, this seemed barbarity. To Russ, it was truth. For war is not a machine. It is hunger and loyalty and the bond of the pack. Yet behind this savagery lay something stranger, something darker. The wolves were made with a gene seed unlike any other, the Canis helix. In those days, the Emperor had not yet cloaked all knowledge in mystery. The gene labs of Luna and Mars whispered with experiments, with attempts to perfect the art of making demigods. For Russ, the Emperor's genetic architects built something wild, something unstable, a seed meant to echo the beasts of Fenris itself. The Canis helix granted the wolves heightened senses, a hunter's reflex, the smell of fear sharp upon their tongues. Their bodies became tougher, their instincts sharper. They could run through blizzards that killed men in minutes, fight for days without rest, and endure wounds that would fell any other Astartes. But all gifts bear a price. The helix twisted some beyond reason. Warriors fell to bestial rage, their features lengthening into fangs and claws, their minds slipping into something less than human. The Wolfen, they were called, cursed sons who howled at the stars, trapped between man and beast. To outsiders, they were abominations. To the wolves, they were brothers still, fallen yet not forsaken. Russ forbade their destruction. He caged them when he must, led them when he could, and promised one day they would run beside him in the end times. That was his way, never discarding, never abandoning. Even monsters had their place in the pack. And so, the Legion grew, carrying the savagery of Fenris into the stars. Their culture was not stripped away and remade, as so many legions had been. Instead, Fenris was exalted. The sagas of the tribes became the sagas of the Legion. Every victory was sung as a tale, every defeat remembered in grim verse. Their chain of command was not a rigid pyramid, but a pack hierarchy, fluid, shifting, bound by respect and ferocity. Leaders were not only appointed, they were proven, tested by deed and by trial. To fight beside the wolves was to be swept into a storm of sound and fury. They did not march in silence, but with howls that froze the blood of their enemies. They did not hold the line like the sons of Dorn, nor strike with surgical precision like the sons of Gilliman. They descended like a hunt, fangs bared, tearing apart their prey in coordinated packs. And when the slaughter was done, they feasted, raising their horns not in mockery, but in honor of the foe. For even in savagery, there was respect. The slain deserved remembrance. But do not mistake their revelry for weakness. The wolves were feared not only for their ferocity, but for their discipline hidden beneath it. To outsiders, their brawls and boasts seemed undisciplined chaos. In truth, every jest, every contest, was a test of strength and unity. Bonds were forged in the mead hall that held as strong as ceramite in battle. No legionary stood alone. No warrior fell unavenged. To fight one wolf was to fight them all. The other Primarchs looked upon this legion with unease. To Robut Gilliman, They were unruly savages, a blunt instrument ill-suited to the great architecture of the Imperium. To Dorn, they were undisciplined, their discipline hidden too well. To Fulgrim, they were unrefined, their brutality an insult to his vision of perfection. Only some, Horus, Sanguinius, saw their worth and their strange nobility. But Russ did not care. The wolves were not made to be understood. They were made to be feared. And yet beneath their laughter and their howls, there was a shadow, the burden of their father's role. Russ had been named Executioner. His legion carried that title too. They were the Emperor's fangs, the hunters of traitors, the enforcers of loyalty. While others brought compliance, the wolves brought finality. When diplomacy failed, when rebellion festered, when a Primarch's pride turned too far, it was the wolves who were unleashed. They bore the weight of being hated, even among their brothers. Russ himself carried this burden like a wound. He loved his kin, the other sons of the Emperor, even those who despised him. Yet he knew in his marrow that his purpose was not simply to fight beside them. It was to kill them, should the Emperor command it, and his wolves would follow him into that blood-soaked duty, even against their own. This tension shaped them. They were not only warriors, but outcasts, alien, even among those who shared their gene-forged nature. They did not join the great councils of war with smooth words or lofty strategies. They stood apart, drinking in silence, their golden-eyed gazes cold. They knew the truth their brothers did not wish to speak. That loyalty is not glory, but obedience unto death. And if the Emperor demanded it, they would be the hand that struck. The wolves bore this with pride and with bitterness. They laughed louder, fought harder, lived wilder, for they knew the shadow that trailed them. Every saga they sang was defiance, every feast a reminder that they still lived free, even as the noose tightened. Thus the Sixth Legion became what it was always meant to be, the reflection of their Primarch, the mirror of Fenris, the executioner's hand hidden beneath a wolf's grin. The sons of Russ, the sons of Fenris, they were not loved, they were not trusted, but when they howled, the galaxy trembled, and in the silence between their howls, Russ himself wondered, if he was the Emperor's blade, then upon whom would he be ordered to fall? They say every weapon carries a purpose. A sword cuts, an axe cleaves, a spear pierces. But what of a son? What is the purpose of a Primarch forged in the Emperor's image? For Leman Russ, the answer was heavier than iron, crueler than frost, and more suffocating than the winters of Fenris. He was not simply a warrior. He was not simply a king. He was the executioner. The title came not in ceremony, but in silence. A single word spoken by the Emperor, its weight falling upon Russ like a mountain. In that moment, the laughter of the feast halls dimmed, the sagas faltered, and the Wolf King felt the chains of destiny close around his throat. For this was no honor. It was a burden. The wolves had been forged wild, yet loyal. Their fury was unmatched, their packs unbreakable. But the Emperor did not name them his shield, nor his vanguard. He named them his hand of death, not for enemies, not for Xenos, not for heretics, but for his own blood. When a Primarch strayed, when loyalty wavered, when pride grew too dangerous, Russ would be the one unleashed. He would be the one to strike down his brothers. No other legion bore such a task. Guilliman could build, Dorn could defend, Horus could lead, but Russ would kill. Not because he was cruel, but because he was loyal, and that loyalty ate at him. Imagine it, to sit among brothers, drinking, laughing, boasting, trading tales of campaigns fought across the stars, and all the while knowing you may one day be ordered to silence their laughter forever. To meet Horus's eyes, and know one day you might cut him down. To feel Sanguinius's hand clasp your shoulder in camaraderie, and to wonder if one day you will strike through that same heart. To stand beside Magnus, your brother in knowledge and flame, and to feel the Emperor's shadow whisper, if he strays, you will end him. Russ carried that shadow into every war. His wolves carried it too. It marked them, isolated them. To the other legions, They were not brothers, but predators on a leash. Their howls carried a promise not only to the enemy, but to kin. We will come if commanded. Russ did not rage against this. He did not defy his father. He bore it, for he believed utterly in the Emperor's vision. The Great Crusade was not a dream to him. It was truth, purpose, the fire that made existence more than survival. If that dream required him to be the hand of death, then he would be that hand. Better him, he thought, than any other. Better a wolf, loyal unto the end, than a traitor who might flinch when a blade was needed. But make no mistake, every time he looked at his brothers, the weight pressed heavier. Russ was not blind to the cruelty of it. He laughed louder to hide it. He drank deeper to drown it. He fought harder, perhaps, to forget it. But in the silence of the hunt, when only the wind moved across the tundra of Fenris, he felt the truth gnaw at him like hunger. This burden shaped him more than any trial of strength or contest of wit. It gave his laughter a sharper edge. It made his feasts grander, his sagas louder, as though each moment might be his last with those he loved. For one day, the Emperor's word might come, and then he would be executioner, not brother. The other Primarchs felt it too, though none said it aloud. They saw how the wolves lingered at the edges of councils, how Russ's golden eyes flickered with something colder than the fires of Fenris. Some respected it. Dorn, perhaps, understood the need for a hand that would do the necessary when others faltered. Horus teased him for it, mocked him even, but beneath the jest was unease. Magnus hated him for it, though Russ never blamed him. How could he, when the burden demanded that Magnus' very life might one day be forfeit to Russ's axe? The wolves did not shy from this role. They embraced it as they embraced all things. If their Primarch was the Emperor's fang, then they would be the jaws that closed. They took pride in their savagery, pride in their feared reputation. Let them hate us, they said, so long as the All-Father loves us. But beneath the boasting, beneath the mead and the howls, was bitterness. They were executioners, and executioners are never loved. For centuries, Russ bore the burden without flinching. He tore down empires, shattered alien kingdoms, crushed rebellions. He did his duty as conqueror and as judge. And in every victory, the sagas grew, louder and prouder, the voice of Fenris echoing across the stars. Yet always in the background lingered the truth that he was set apart, that he was the one chosen to kill kin if kin faltered. It hardened him, made him sharp, unyielding, less forgiving than others. Where Gilliman might see the chance for order, Russ saw only weakness that could fester. Where Horus extended trust, Russ withheld it, wary of betrayal before it even began. It was not paranoia. It was preparation. Executioners cannot afford blindness. And yet, for all his loyalty, for all his obedience, Russ was still Fenrisian. He was still wolf, still wild. He would obey the Emperor, yes, but he would never be a slave to the High Lords, nor a pawn to ambition. If he was to kill a brother, it would be by his father's command alone, the Emperor's voice, and none other. This oath would become the very core of his tragedy. For the day would come when the order did fall, when he was commanded to hunt Magnus of Prospero, when he was unleashed not to bind, but to burn. And in that moment, Russ would realize the cruelest truth of all, that even executioners can be deceived. But that lay ahead. For now, in the golden age of the Crusade, Russ drank with his brothers, hunted across alien skies, and led his legion in triumph after triumph. The wolves howled in joy, their sagas echoing louder than ever. Yet in the quiet, when the fires burned low and the laughter faded, Russ sat alone, staring into the embers. The golden eyes that men said gleamed with mirth burned with something else, something none dared name. Not sorrow, not fear, but inevitability. The burden of an executioner is not that he kills. It is that he knows one day he must kill those he loves most. And for Leman Russ, the Wolf King, that day drew closer with every saga sung, with every brother embraced, with every howl that tore through the dark. The blade was forged, the blade was sharp, and one day the blade would fall. They say no wolf runs alone forever. Even the fiercest must learn the ways of the pack, or be torn apart. So it was with Leman Russ, hurled into the galaxy not just as king of Fenris, but as one of 20 sons, each bearing the Emperor's fire. Brothers, rivals, mirrors, men who were more than men, each destined to shape the fate of empires. And though Russ would one day be named executioner, he was also comrade, friend, challenger. In his bonds and in his rivalries, his saga grew sharper, louder, and darker. Among his brothers, none drew him closer than Horus Lupercal. The War Master, brightest of them all, shone with charm and power, with a voice that could sway kings and warriors alike. Where Russ was blunt and fierce, Horus was subtle, weaving webs of loyalty and camaraderie. The two met in contests of laughter and blood, and for a time, Russ found in Horus not a rival, but a companion of the hunt. Together they shared victories, drank deep from horns of triumph, and matched one another in boast and deed. Russ saw in Horus a brother he could trust, a leader he could follow into the jaws of any storm. It is bitter to think, then, that it was Horus who would one day twist the knife deepest into his heart. Not all bonds were so warm. With Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, the rivalry was one of iron against iron. Dorn was the fortress incarnate, dour, unyielding, a builder of walls both stone and will. Russ, wild and restless, tested those walls again and again. Their contests were legendary, strength against endurance, fury against discipline. When they feasted, their arguments shook halls. When they fought, their clashes left scars upon the very ground. Yet beneath it lay respect. For Russ understood that even a wolf must know when to trust a stone at his back, and Dorn knew that a fortress is only as strong as the warriors who sally forth from it. They quarreled, they clashed, but their rivalry was steel sharpening steel. But there were rivalries darker still, bitter as poison. Chief among them, Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels. If Russ was storm and fire, the Lion was shadow and silence, a hunter who stalked alone and trusted little. Their hatred was born not of misunderstanding, but of likeness. Both were predators, both born to command, both unable to yield. At the campaign of Dulin, where the Emperor ordered compliance of a system steeped in defiance, the rivalry erupted into violence. The Lion and Russ stood shoulder to shoulder in the war's beginning, but when the last citadel fell, their pride collided. Russ expected a feast, a saga, a howl to the heavens. The Lion ended the battle with cold precision, offering no song, no roar, only finality. To Russ, it was an insult to the spirit of war itself. They fought, Primarch against Primarch, claws and blade, laughter against silence. For a day and a night they battled, neither yielding, neither slain, until their warriors tore them apart. From then on, bitterness festered. Russ mocked the Lion as humorless, cold, a shadow without warmth. The Lion spat back that Russ was a savage drunk, more beast than man. Their feud became legend, a wound never healed, a tale sung in sagas and whispered in shame. To this day, it lingers like a scar that will not fade. Yet if the Lion was Russ's bitterest rival, another was his most dangerous opponent, Ongron, Primarch of the World Eaters. Where Russ's fury was tempered by loyalty, Angren's was slavery's wound made flesh, endless rage burning like an open flame. The two clashed in what would be remembered as the Night of the Wolf, a duel that shook the legions and scarred their kinship forever. But that saga belongs to another chapter. Russ's bonds and rivalries were not only blood feuds. He found joy in contest, in battle of wit and strength with his brothers. With Vulcan, he shared feasts and laughter, their voices booming together in halls that could barely contain them. With Ferris Manus, he matched his raw fury against the Gorgon's iron will, testing strength with blows that rang like anvils struck. With Sanguinius, he shared something gentler, though no less fierce, respect for the nobility of sacrifice. Sanguinius, angel-winged, saw the beast beneath Russ's skin and did not recoil. In turn, Russ saw in Sanguinius the rare purity that even wolves must honor. But Russ was not beloved by all. To Fulgrim, his savagery was an insult. To Guilliman, his lack of order was dangerous. To Perturabo, his mirth was a mask, hiding something less honest. And Magnus, Magnus, here lay a bond that would break worlds. For Magnus, master of sorcery, bearer of knowledge, was both admired and mistrusted by Russ. Russ respected his power, his brilliance, his kinship of fire. But Russ also heard the Emperor's whispers, the warnings that Magnus' path skirted ruin. Between them grew a tension like thunderclouds, ready to split the sky. One day, Russ would be sent to judge Magnus. One day, he would be ordered to kill. It was in these rivalries and these bonds that Russ's saga found its heart. He was no isolated beast, no lone predator. He was a wolf among wolves, fighting, laughing, bleeding with those who shared his father's fire. He loved them fiercely, even those he hated. That was his tragedy, for the Emperor had named him executioner, and every bond was a noose, every rivalry a blade waiting to be turned inward. When he drank with Horus, when he wrestled Dorn, when he roared against the lion, Russ carried the shadow of that burden. He did not speak of it. He did not weep. He laughed louder. He fought harder. He feasted deeper. But always, behind his golden eyes, there was the inevitability of his role. The sagas tell us that Russ was more than warrior, more than Primarch. He was storm and laughter, ferocity and loyalty. But even storms must break, even laughter must fade. His bonds would be tested. His rivalries would spill blood. And one day, his hand would fall not on strangers, but on brothers. The wolf had found his pack, but a pack can turn upon itself. And when it did, it was Russ who would be called to bite first. The wolf and the hound are kin, but when hunger drives them, even kin will bare their fangs. So it was with Leman Russ and Angron, a night written not in saga, but in blood, remembered with shame by some and with dread by all. The Night of the Wolf. It began not as feud, but as necessity. The World Eaters, Angron's legion, had fallen into madness. They were once warriors, fierce and relentless, but under their Primarch they became something worse. Angron had been raised in chains, his skull carved with the butcher's nails, devices that burned away compassion and replaced it with rage. His legion followed his path, cutting into their own flesh and minds to bear the same torment. They sought only slaughter, every battle a feast of blood, every victory a massacre. They disobeyed imperial order, ignored restraint, and left nothing behind but corpses and ashes. The Emperor's vision was not mercy, but even he demanded purpose. Wars must build an imperium, not merely sate a Primarch's rage. And so, he turned to his executioner. Russ was sent to confront Angron, not to kill him, not yet, but to bring him to heel, to remind him that loyalty was not destruction, that brotherhood meant more than slaughter. But Russ knew the truth before he left. The wolf was being sent to bite the hound. The two legions met on the ash wastes of Genna, a world already broken by Angron's fury. The sky was choked with smoke, the ground littered with bones. Into that silence marched the wolves of Fenris, their banners snapping in the wind, their howls echoing across the ruins. And from the other side came the World Eaters, their armor painted crimson, their eyes wild, their axes dripping with blood not yet dry. At their head strode Angron, a giant of muscle and fury, his nails thrumming, his laughter like the roar of a beast chained too long. The meeting should have been words. Russ tried, though his words were few and blunt. "Brother," he said, "you shame our father. You shame us all. Restrain your sons, or I will." Angron's reply was a howl. "Restrain? You dare speak of restraint? You, who feasts and howls like a beast yourself. You think yourself better, wolf? I am free. My sons are free. We kill as we were meant to, and I will not bow to your leash." There was no more talking. The wolves drew their blades. The World Eaters roared with joy, and upon the ashen plains, brother fought brother, legion against legion. The sagas say the clash was like no other. Wolves fought in packs, disciplined even in their fury, striking with coordination, surrounding their foes, dragging them down. The World Eaters fought like berserkers unleashed, their axes rising and falling in an endless rhythm, heedless of pain, heedless of wounds. The ground turned red, the smoke filled with the sound of howls and screams. Russ and Angron met in the center, as though the world itself had conspired to bring them together. Russ came with axe and fong, his golden eyes blazing, his laughter rising even in battle. Angron came with chain axes screaming, every blow fueled by torment, every strike meant to kill. They fought like gods fallen to earth. Russ moved with precision, each strike chosen, each parry a test. Angron struck like storm and avalanche, each blow shaking the ground, his rage of fire no wall could hold. They traded wounds, their blood hissing on the hot ash, their voices carrying across the battlefield. Russ mocked even as he bled, trying to rattle his brother's focus. Angron answered only with roars, his voice breaking into animal fury. Neither would yield, neither could. The wolves pressed their foes with discipline, holding formation even as their brothers fell. The World Eaters tore into them with abandon, each man fighting as if possessed. Hours passed, and still the battle raged, neither side breaking. At last, Russ brought Angron low. With a final roar, he struck his brother across the jaw, sending him sprawling into the dirt. He stood over him, axe raised, the wolves howling in triumph. For a moment, all was silence but the crackle of fire. Russ could have ended it, could have slain Angron, silenced the World Eaters forever. The burden of the executioner demanded it, but he did not. He cast down his axe and snarled, his voice echoing across the field. This is not your death, Angron. Not yet. But know this. If you cannot master yourself, if you cannot master your sons, then one day I will return, and then I will not stay my hand. Angron rose, blood on his lips, laughter on his breath. Then come, wolf. Come again and again. I will never stop. I will never bow. Kill me, if you dare. Russ turned his back. His wolves followed, their howls echoing into the night. The World Eaters roared in defiance, their axes still dripping. Neither side had won. Neither side had yielded. It was not a battle. It was a warning. The night of the wolf was remembered in silence and in shame, for the legions had fought not as brothers, but as enemies. The Imperium had seen its first taste of civil war. Not yet open, not yet named, but inevitable. The wolves had not killed the hounds. The hounds had not broken the wolves. Both still lived, both still burned, and the galaxy itself would feel the weight of their clash. Russ bore the guilt in silence. He had done as commanded. He had restrained, not slain, but he knew the truth. Angron would never change. The nails had seen to that. His legion would never know restraint, never know loyalty, but to rage. One day, Russ would have to kill him. One day, the executioner would be unleashed again. But not yet. The galaxy still turned, the crusade still burned bright, and the wolves still howled at the night sky. Yet somewhere, in that night, the stars themselves whispered a betrayal to come. And when that day dawned, the night of the wolf would be remembered not as a warning, but as prophecy. The wolf had spared the hound, but the hound would one day help tear the pack apart. They say the blade does not choose where it falls. It is wielded, it is commanded, and when the Emperor named Leman Russ his executioner, he gave him no luxury of choice. Russ obeyed, always, even when the order would damn him, even when it demanded the death of a brother he still loved. This is the tragedy of Prospero, the burning of a world, the breaking of kin, the night when Russ's axe drank too deeply. The tale begins with Magnus the Red, the Crimson King. If Russ was wolf, Magnus was flame, brilliant, blinding, dangerous. Magnus' legion, the 1,000 Sons, were masters of psychic arts, wielders of knowledge and sorcery that terrified the Imperium. Where Russ trusted instinct, Magnus trusted reason. Where Russ howled to the stars, Magnus whispered to them, and between them grew rivalry. Russ saw the warp as poison, Magnus as possibility. The Emperor forbade sorcery, but Magnus defied him, believing he knew better than even their father. When Magnus shattered the Emperor's secret webway project with his psychic warning, the line was crossed. He had meant to save the Imperium, to warn of Horus's betrayal. Instead, his spell tore open the wards, dooming a work the Emperor had built in silence for decades. The Emperor's fury was immeasurable. He needed his executioner. He gave Russ the order, "Go to Prospero, bring Magnus to Terra in chains." That was the command. But between Terra and Fenris, the order changed. For Horus Lupercal, already corrupted by chaos, whispered poison into Russ's ear. He told him the Emperor had given a different command, not to capture, but to destroy, to burn Prospero to ash, to slay Magnus and end his legion forever. And Russ, bound by duty, loyal unto the end, believed. The wolves descended upon Prospero in fire and steel. The skies turned black with drop pods. The seas boiled beneath the weight of orbital bombardment. Spires of white marble cracked and burned, their libraries of knowledge reduced to ash. The thousand suns fought with psychic fire, their spells tearing through the wolves like lances of flame. But the wolves did not falter. They howled through the inferno, their blades cutting down scholars and sorcerers alike. It was no battle. It was an execution. Russ himself led the charge. His golden eyes burned as he tore through the streets of Tisca, the jewel of Prospero. Statues crumbled beneath his fists. Warriors broke beneath his axe. Every step forward was a step deeper into damnation, but he did not stop, for he believed it was the Emperor's will. He believed he was saving the Imperium. Magnus watched his world burn. His brothers fell around him. His sons screamed in the flames. He confronted Russ at last, upon the steps of his great pyramid, where the fires of sorcery clashed with the fury of Fenris. The duel was titanic. Russ came with blade and fong, each strike a thunderclap. Magnus came with psychic flame, his staff blazing with the power of the warp. They were not simply men. They were gods clashing, shaking the world beneath their feet. Russ howled in rage. Magnus wept in fury. One fought to obey, the other to protect. But in their struggle, there was only destruction. At last, Russ broke Magnus' back across his knee. The sound echoed like the snapping of the world itself. He could have killed him then. Perhaps he should have. But Russ hesitated. Even his executioner, even his loyal son, he still loved his brother. He spared him. And in that mercy, damnation entered. For Magnus, broken and betrayed, turned fully to the warp. His pact with Tsench, the changer of ways, was sealed in that moment. He and his legion were transformed into something no longer human, no longer Astartes. The thousand suns became dust and spirit-bound in armor. The rubric would come later, but the seed was sown in fire that day. Russ had not destroyed sorcery. He had unleashed it. Prospero was left in ruin. Its libraries, its temples, its people burned to ash. The wolves feasted in silence, their howls hollow, their horns raised not in triumph, but in bitterness. For this was no victory. It was butchery. Russ bore the guilt heavier than any wound. He had been deceived. He had obeyed, and in obeying, he had damned not only Magnus, but himself. His brothers looked on him with suspicion, some with hatred. To Gilliman, to Dorn, even to Sanguinius, he had become what they feared most, the blade that could fall upon any of them. The bond between brothers was shattered, and Russ knew it. The burning of Prospero scarred him forever. His distrust of psychers, his hatred of sorcery, his bitterness toward the Imperium's politics, all were born from that day. He would never again believe that obedience was purity. He would never again trust that loyalty alone was enough. The wolves sang the saga of Prospero, but they sang it in low voices, as though ashamed of the verse. For it was not the saga of triumph. It was the saga of regret. The Emperor had named Russ his executioner. On Prospero, that name became truth. And Russ learned the cruelest lesson of all, that sometimes loyalty is the sharpest betrayal. For what is worse, to betray your father or to betray your brother in your father's name? Russ had done both, and the galaxy would never forget. When a storm comes, even the strongest walls tremble. But some do not hide, some do not break. Some stand in the teeth of the tempest and howl back. So it was with Leman Russ and his wolves when the galaxy was drowned in the fire of the Horus heresy. The shadow of Prospero still clung to him like frost that would not melt. His hands were stained with the ashes of a brother's world. His name whispered in councils as murderer, as tyrant, as weapon wielded without mercy. Yet when Horus declared his rebellion, when the brightest sun turned to the darkness of chaos, Russ did not hesitate. He did not doubt. For all his guilt, for all his bitterness, he still had his purpose. He was the Emperor's fawn, and if the galaxy itself howled against the throne, then he would howl louder still. But mistrust followed him. The legions that once feasted beside him looked on him with suspicion. Some wondered if he had been Horus's hound all along, unleashed to do the War Master's bidding at Prospero. Others whispered that Russ enjoyed his role, that he was a beast too savage to be contained. The irony was cruel. Of all the Emperor's sons, none were more loyal, none more willing to bear the burden of obedience, and yet none were more distrusted. The wolves did not care. They stood with their father, as they always had, their howls rising above the storm. Across the stars, where traitor legions spread fire and corruption, the wolves tore at their throats. They were hunters unleashed, tracking Horus's forces through void and battlefield, striking where others faltered. Their packs fought with savage unity, their axes cutting through traitor steel, their laughter echoing even as the galaxy burned. Yet for every victory, there was bitterness. Russ and his sons were not diplomats, not healers. They could not mend what was broken. They could only kill. Whole worlds bled beneath their boots, their loyalty marked not by banners raised, but by enemies slain. And so the wolves were feared not only by traitors, but by those they fought to protect. To see the wolves descend was to see judgment, whether deserved or not. The executioner had no gentleness, no second chances. Russ himself carried the heresy like a wound that would not close. He had loved Horus, had trusted him. Horus had once been the brother he laughed beside, the leader he might have followed without hesitation. Now he was the arch-traitor, the voice that had twisted Russ's duty into massacre at Prospero. Every howl Russ loosed in battle was filled with fury not only at Horus's betrayal, but at his own gullibility. He had been deceived once. Never again. When the wolves fought the traitors, Russ fought with a ferocity no other Primarch could match. He tore through lines of word-bearers, shattered ranks of traitorous iron warriors, and clashed against berserkers of Angren's legion with the same savage joy he had shown on the night of the wolf. He laughed even as he bled, his voice carrying above the clash of blades like a storm breaking upon the land. But behind the laughter was grief, and behind the grief, rage. The heresy was not just a war to Russ. It was a betrayal of everything he had been made for. He was the executioner, sworn to strike at traitors. Yet what was the heresy if not a betrayal by those who should have been most loyal? His brothers, his kin, had abandoned the Emperor, and he, Russ, was tasked to kill them. Not just Magnus, not just Angron, all of them, should they stand against the throne. The burden that had always shadowed him now became his reality. The wolf was no longer hunting shadows. The wolf was tearing down his own pack. The wolves endured. They fought at Alax's, at Yerent, at countless forgotten worlds swallowed by the maelstrom of rebellion. Wherever they went, they carried fear and awe, their saga growing darker with every battle. They howled not for glory, but for loyalty, and in their howls was the grief of brothers lost. Russ himself changed. The laughter that once filled the mead halls grew rarer. His mirth became edged with bitterness. His eyes, once golden with joy, burned colder, sharper. He still feasted, still fought, still howled. But beneath it all, The weight pressed heavier. He had become the very thing his brothers accused him of, the hand of death, the Emperor's blade, and he could no longer deny it. Yet in the storm of treachery, he never faltered. He did not question his loyalty. Others doubted, others wavered, others turned. Russ stood. He stood because he had no other choice. He stood because if the Emperor's executioner bent, then what hope remained for any of them? The sagas of the wolves and the heresy are less sung, less told, for they are sagas of slaughter, of endless hunts across a galaxy in flames. They do not shine like Guilliman's strategies, nor inspire like Sanguinius's nobility. They are sagas of necessity, of blood spilled, so the Emperor's vision might endure a little longer. And perhaps that is why they are forgotten. For who wishes to remember the hand that strikes when the heart is already breaking? Still, the wolves endured. They endured until Terra called, until the final storm gathered at the heart of the Imperium, and all loyal sons were summoned to the throne world. There at last, Russ would stand not against shadows, but in the full light of betrayal. There, his howl would join his brothers in a final defiance. But even as he turned his gaze toward Terra, Russ carried the shadow of Prospero. He had been deceived once. He had been made the butcher of kin, and though he would fight at the Emperor's side until his last breath, he wondered in the silence between battles whether the executioner's role was curse or necessity, whether loyalty was salvation or doom. The heresy raged like a storm, and Russ, the wolf, stood against it, his voice rising above the thunder. Loyal unto death. Loyal even when loyalty was a wound that bled without end. They say when the end comes, the wolves always return to the den. And so it was with Leman Russ and his sons, when the heresy brought the galaxy's fury to Terra itself. The siege of Terra, where the Emperor's dream was dragged bleeding into the dust, and the fangs of his loyal sons were bared one last time. By the time the wolves reached the throne world, the sky itself was already aflame. The traitor fleets blackened the void, their guns pounding the walls of the imperial palace like hammers, striking an anvil of doom. The air was thick with smoke and blood, the streets choked with the corpses of civilians who had fled the bombardments. The golden throne loomed above it all, its light defiant but faltering, a beacon trembling in the storm. The wolves took their place at the gates, not in glory halls, not in command chambers, but in the blood-soaked mud of the outer walls, shoulder to shoulder with mortal soldiers, their howls echoing against the thunder of traitor guns. To Russ, this was fitting. Executioners do not sit upon thrones. They stand at the threshold with axe in hand, daring the storm to break upon them. The sons of Fenris fought with savage loyalty. Where the traitors poured across the battlements, the wolves met them fawn to fawn. They hurled themselves into the press of war with laughter and fury, their axes cleaving ceramite and flesh alike. They fought in packs, covering each other, dragging down berserkers of the world eaters, dueling the fallen sons of the dark angels, tearing apart the corrupted iron warriors who smashed at the gates. Their howls rose above the din, war cries that shook even the hearts of traitor Astartes. Russ himself was everywhere. He did not command from afar. He led from the front, his voice a storm, his axe dripping with the blood of traitors. He stood upon the walls as fire rained from the skies, laughing even as shells burst around him. He strode into breaches, dragging down enemy champions with his bare hands, his golden eyes blazing like torches in the smoke. He fought with the joy of Fenris, but beneath it lay grief. For every traitor he cut down was once a brother's son, once kin in the Great Crusade. Every strike was a funeral dirge. The wolves gained little glory in the songs of Terra. The blood angels are remembered for their angels' fall, Sanguinius's last stand upon the vengeful spirit. The imperial fists are remembered for their walls, Dorne's unyielding defense. The white scars are remembered for their lightning raids, striking like storms through the traitor lines. The wolves, what are they remembered for? Only for their howls in the mud, their fangs at the gate, their bodies piled high so others might endure. But perhaps that is fitting. For Russ had always been the weapon, the fong, the hand of death. The siege was no different. He bore his burden without flinching, his legion following without question. They died in droves, but they did not falter. When the walls cracked, they were there. When the traitors breached, they were there. When the emperor's light flickered, they howled louder, drowning despair in their ferocity. There are sagas half-whispered of duels fought upon those walls, of Russ facing Onron again, their roars shaking the palace foundations as they clashed amidst the fire, of Russ tearing through the word-bearers like a wolf through a flock of sheep, his fury so great that even the demons recoiled, of moments when he reached for Horus, only to be dragged back by circumstance, by duty, by the chaos of war. Whether these tales are truth or myth, who can say? But what is certain is this: Russ bled at Terra, and his wolves left their bones in the shadow of the throne. And then came the final act. The emperor ascended to the vengeful spirit, to face Horus alone. The wolves, battered and broken, were left at the gates, howling as their father vanished into the storm. They did not see what transpired aboard that accursed ship. They only heard the silence when it was done. Horus slain, the emperor broken, the dream shattered. When Dorn brought the emperor's broken body back to the throne, Russ was there. He saw his father, the man he had obeyed above all else, carried lifeless, his golden light extinguished, his body ruined beyond mortal comprehension. And Russ, the wolf who laughed at death, the king who mocked despair, fell silent. His howl caught in his throat, his golden eyes dimmed. For all his fury, for all his loyalty, he had not been enough. None of them had. The siege ended not in triumph, but in mourning. The traitors fled, the throne still stood, but the emperor was entombed upon it, his dream with him. The wolves gathered their dead, their sagas bitter in their mouths. They had defended the gates. They had howled in defiance. But in the end, what had it gained them? A throne of ash, a father entombed, a galaxy broken. Russ stood among the ruins, his axe dripping, his armor scorched, his face lined with grief. He had obeyed to the end. He had been the executioner, the blade, the fawn. But the storm had still broken their world. They say the siege of Terra was the greatest battle of the age. But for Russ, it was no saga of glory. It was the moment he realized that loyalty alone could not save the Imperium, that even the fiercest howl could not silence the storm. The wolves had stood at the gate, and still the world had fallen. When the storm has passed, silence is the loudest sound. And in that silence after the siege of Terra, when the traitors fled and the emperor was entombed upon the golden throne, the wolves of Fenris found no joy, no song, no feast. Only the bitter taste of ashes. Leman Russ stood amidst ruin. He had howled through the fire, bled with his brothers, struck down traitors without mercy. He had been the Fong at the gate, the executioner made manifest. And yet when the dust settled, he beheld not victory, but a father broken, a dream dying, a galaxy drowning in its own blood. He had obeyed. He had been loyal. But the Imperium was shattered, and the price of that loyalty weighed upon him heavier than any chain. The wolves gathered their dead in grim silence. Where once they had roared their sagas after battle, now their voices faltered. Their howls were hollow, their laughter dim, for they had defended the Emperor's dream. Yes, but the dream had died regardless. They carried their brothers home, not on shields of triumph, but on pyres of grief. Russ changed in those days. The mirth that once defined him, the booming laugh, the joy in contest, the feast that shook mead halls, faded. His laughter remained, but it was sharper now, edged with bitterness. His golden eyes seemed darker, his voice heavier. He still drank, still fought, still led, but the burden of remorse hung about him like a shroud. He had seen too much. He had borne too much. The burning of Prospero haunted him most. Though the heresy had proven Magnus' doom inevitable, Russ could not forgive himself. He had been deceived, made a weapon of Horus's lies, unleashed to butcher a brother when he should have bound him. And in doing so, he had driven Magnus into the arms of the warp completely. The executioner had not prevented damnation. He had delivered it. From this wound came Russ's hatred of sorcery, his suspicion of psychers. He had seen what unrestrained power did, how it corrupted, how it consumed. He swore that never again would his sons be seduced by such paths. The wolves embraced distrust of witchcraft so fiercely it became their creed. Where others tolerated psychers, the wolves treated them as burdens, dangerous tools to be bound, watched, mistrusted. The rune priests of Fenris alone were spared Russ's fury, but even they bore the weight of his suspicion. And beyond psychers, Russ's bitterness grew toward the Imperium itself. He had obeyed without question. He had carried out the Emperor's orders, slain in his name, borne the hatred of his brothers as the executioner. And what had it won? A throne that chained the Emperor in deathless torment, an Imperium that turned faith into shackles, politics into rot, and brotherhood into ash. Russ did not abandon the Imperium. Never that. His loyalty was too deep, his love for his father too fierce. But he withdrew. The wolves pulled back from imperial politics. They kept to themselves, apart from the High Lords and their decrees, apart from the endless bickering of Terra's rulers. They became insular, bound to Fenris, their sagas their own. Russ would not let his sons be pawns again, would not let them be deceived into slaughter for the sake of pride or lies. They would fight for the Imperium, yes, but on their own terms, in their own way, as wolves free of the leash. This separation bred resentment. Guilliman, Dorn, even the remnants of other legions saw the wolves as dangerous, untrustworthy, too independent. The distrust seated at Prospero now blossomed fully. But Russ did not care. He had been executioner once. He would be outcast now. If that was the price of loyalty, so be it. And yet, he mourned. For Russ was no cold recluse, no silent stone like Dorn. His heart burned hot with love for his brothers, even those who now distrusted him. He grieved that their bonds had been severed, that the laughter of the Great Crusade would never return. He mourned Horus, who had once been closest to him. He mourned Sanguinius, whose light had been extinguished in sacrifice. He mourned Magnus, even in betrayal, for once he had been kin. This was the burden of remorse. To know that he had done all he could, and yet it had not been enough. To know that loyalty had demanded he kill what he loved. To know that obedience had been twisted into betrayal. And still to endure, to lead, to carry the wolves forward into a galaxy darker than ever before. Russ became harder in those years, sharper. His laughter was now a weapon, his mirth a shield against despair. He drove his sons harder, demanding loyalty, ferocity, unity. They became more than a legion. They became a brotherhood bound not only by duty, but by survival. Their sagas turned grim, filled less with boasts and more with laments. But still they endured. Always they endured. The Imperium was not healed by victory at Terra. It limped on, broken, scarred, decaying. And Russ knew it. He spoke of it only rarely, in words heavy with bitterness. "We won the war," he told his sons once. "And in doing so, we lost everything." Those words became a truth that shaped the wolves ever after. They did not fight for triumph anymore. They fought for survival, for the pack, for the memory of the All-Father, for the sagas that would outlast the darkness. And through it all, Russ carried his remorse not as weakness, but as burden. He did not weep in public, did not falter before his sons, but in the quiet of the mead halls, staring into the fire, he would fall silent. His golden eyes reflected the flames, and though his lips curled in laughter, there was no joy in it. Only the howl of a wolf that had lost too much and knew it was not done losing. The executioner had survived the heresy, but the cost was everything he had once loved. They say every saga ends with silence, but for Leman Russ, silence was not an ending. It was a promise. He did not die upon a battlefield, his body broken in blood and glory. He did not fall to treachery, nor was he entombed in stasis like so many of his kin. He vanished, and in that vanishing, he became more myth than man, more prophecy than Primarch. It happened in the long shadow after the heresy. The Imperium was broken, yet enduring, held together by faith and fear. The Emperor sat upon his throne, silent, a god in name, but a prisoner in truth. The wolves of Fenris, scarred by guilt and mistrust, remained loyal but apart, their sagas no longer sung in triumph, but in bitterness. And Russ, the Wolf King, grew restless. He had carried too much. Prospero haunted him. Terror weighed upon him. The deaths of his brothers gnawed at his soul, and though he remained fierce, his laughter rang hollow, edged with sorrow. He saw the Imperium not as the golden dream his father had envisioned, but as a husk, bound in chains of dogma and rule. He had obeyed, always obeyed, and still the dream had turned to rot. So Russ gathered his sons. He called them back to Fenris for the greatest feast the world had ever seen. For days the mountains echoed with laughter and song, with contests of strength and endless horns of mead. The wolves sang sagas of their victories, roared their grief for their dead, and celebrated as though the end of days was already upon them. Yet beneath the revelry lay unease. For Russ's golden eyes gleamed too brightly, his voice carried too heavy. It was as though he knew something they did not. On the final night, as the fires burned low and silence fell, Russ rose. His frame towered above the mead hall, his presence filling the hearts of every warrior who watched. He lifted his drinking horn one last time and spoke words that would echo for millennia. "My sons," he said, his voice like thunder rolling across the ice, "I go now, not to death, not to dishonor, but to destiny. A time will come when the stars themselves drown in blood, when the Emperor's light falters and chaos rises in its full strength. When that day comes, the wolf time, I will return, and I will lead you once more." With that, he left. Some say he walked into the mountains, his howls fading into the storm. Others say he strode into the sea, swallowed by the waves. Some whisper he entered the eye of terror itself, hunting demons in their own realm. None know for certain. The only truth is that he never returned. His disappearance was not death, it was prophecy. The wolves mourned, but they did not despair. They kept his sagas alive, their skalds singing not of an end, but of a promise. The Wolf King was not gone. He was waiting, sharpening his fangs in some hidden place, preparing for the final battle. And so, in the 41st millennium, his name remains not just legend, but hope. The wolves fight on, scarred by mutation, cursed by the wolfen, mistrusted by the Imperium they serve. Yet still they howl Russ's name, still they believe in his return. For to the Space Wolves, the saga of their Primarch has no ending. Some whisper that the wolf time is already here, that the great rift splitting the galaxy, the howling madness of chaos unbound, is the herald Russ foresaw. They listen for his howl in the storms of the warp. They search the stars for signs of his return, and whether myth or truth, that hope burns in their hearts like fire against the endless night. Leman Russ, the Wolf King, the blade of the Emperor, the executioner, the brother, the betrayer, the loyal son. His saga is not finished. It waits, coiled like a beast in the dark, ready to strike when the stars themselves bleed. And until that day, the wolves keep their vigil. They drink, they fight, they howl to the skies, for they know that one day, when the galaxy drowns, the Wolf King will return. And on that day, his laughter will shake the heavens, his axe will drink deep, and his saga will end as it began, with a howl that carries across eternity.